Okay, so election season is in full swing, right? And you're probably trying to cut through all the noise and figure out what really matters.
Yeah, it can feel overwhelming for sure.
Totally. And we love to dig deep into the stuff you're curious about, and we got a request from you to break down Project 2025. It's been all over the news, so we're diving right in.
It's definitely a hot topic right now.
To get into it, we've got two main sources. First, there's this Project 2025 Mandate for Leadership document.
Basically, a roadmap for how a potential presidential administration might shake things up in Washington.
Exactly. It's like their playbook. And one thing that stood out, they name specific people for key roles.
Yeah, and that's not typical.
Not at all. It's one thing to have policy ideas, but this is like, here's the team and here's what they'll do.
Right, it's very specific.
Okay, so let's talk about some of these names because they're familiar. For Homeland Security, they've got Ken Cuccinelli.
Interesting choice. He was pretty instrumental in the last administration's immigration policies.
Yeah, he's known for his tough stance on immigration, for sure.
Yeah.
Then there's Kyron Skinner. She is at the State Department, and now they're eyeing her for a potential comeback.
Makes you wonder what direction they envision for foreign policy.
For sure. And for education, they've picked Lindsey Burke. She was an advisor to Betsy DeVos, so...
So a particular approach to education reform is probably on the table.
Yeah, it's a pretty clear signal.
What's striking here is the level of preemptive planning. This isn't just a wish list. It's like a blueprint, a government in waiting, ready to go on day one.
It's a bold move.
Absolutely. We've seen transitions before, but this level of detail and pre-planning is unusual.
It really makes you wonder what they're so prepared for. So they've got the who, but what about the what? What are they actually planning to do if they get in?
Right, we need to get into the specifics.
Exactly. And one that really jumped out at me was in education. They want all high school students to take the ASV, the military entrance exam.
Interesting. I remember taking that. It's pretty common, actually. It's meant to, assess your aptitude for different military jobs.
Yeah, but making it mandatory for all high schoolers, that's a whole other thing.
It would be a major shift for sure. Would definitely spark a lot of debate. Some people would argue it's a good thing, encourages kids to think about military service, maybe opens up career paths they hadn't considered.
Others might say it's like pushing kids towards the military.
Exactly. It's a complex issue with valid points on both sides.
For sure. Okay, moving on. Another area where Project 2025 is proposing big changes, healthcare. We're talking about potential changes to Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act, and these, what is Project 2025 articles. They throw out some numbers that are kind of alarming, honestly.
Yeah, healthcare is always a sensitive topic.
Right. Like they're talking about Medicaid cuts that could impact, get this, hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of people.
Wow. Any changes to these programs would have a huge ripple effect.
Absolutely. One article, I think was the one about Michigan, it said something like almost 500,000 people there could lose their Medicaid. And remember those economic impacts we talked about? Some families could be looking at a tax hike like $3,000. That's a huge burden, especially for folks who are already struggling.
Yeah, it puts a fine point on how these policy debates, they're not just theoretical, They have real-world consequences for real people.
Totally. And it's not limited to one state or one program either. Let's talk about the environment for a sec. Another area where Project 2025 have people talking, especially with those proposed changes to NOAA.
Right, NOAA, they're the ones who do all the weather forecasting, hurricane tracking, all that.
Exactly. And with climate change making these storms worse, NOAA is more important than ever. Think about Hurricane Helene right now, bearing down on the southeast.
Yeah.
Any change to how NOAA works, how it's funded, that's going to raise some eyebrows, especially for people who live in hurricane zones. And it's not just NOAA, right? They're also talking about changing the EPA, which impacts everything environmental.
Yeah. The EPA is a big one for sure. When you think about regulations and enforcement and how that all trickles down to businesses and community.
For sure. It's huge. And with all these proposed changes, it's no wonder people are kind of freaking out a bit.
It's a lot to take in. Yeah. It's important to remember this isn't the first time someone's tried to totally reshape the government, We've seen similar things throughout history, different groups with their own agendas trying to make their mark.
Totally. You think about Reagan back in the 80s, for example, his whole revolution thing, or the contract with America in the 90s. Those were big swings at changing how things work.
Exactly. And those historical parallels, they remind us that these massive overhauls, they're complicated. Even with the best intentions, the government's a huge machine.
Right. It's like trying to turn a giant ship, I imagine.
Exactly. It takes time and coordination. And even then, you can't always predict what's going to happen.
So true. And speaking of unpredictable, have you seen the public reaction to all of this? It's all over the place.
Yeah, the What is Project 2025 articles, they capture the spectrum. For some people, this is exactly what they want, like a return to conservative values and smaller government.
Right. And then you have others who see it as way too extreme. Like they're worried about what it means for the future of the country.
And some are even using terms like coup. It's a reminder that this isn't just some theoretical debate. It's connected to real anxieties about power and control.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, that's what makes Project 2025 so fascinating. Whether it actually happens or not, it's got people talking about what role they want the government to play.
And that's a conversation worth having.
Couldn't agree more. And you know what? We wouldn't be having this conversation if it weren't for you, our listeners. Because you're the ones who requested this deep dive. You recognize how important this whole Project 2025 thing is, and you wanted to understand it better.
And that's what we're all about here, giving you the information you need to make sense of the world.
Exactly. So keep those questions coming. And in the meantime, keep digging into those What is Project 2025 articles. Read them for yourself. See what everyone's saying.
Don't just take our word for it.
Because the more informed you are, the better equipped you'll be to navigate this crazy world of politics and policy. So as this election unfolds, keep Project 2025 in mind. Pay attention to how it's being talked about, debated, maybe even implemented, because understanding what's going on is the first step to shaping the future you want to see. Until next time, keep asking those tough questions and keep diving deep.